Hi, Barbara.
Hello. I'm just setting up the live stream. There we go. Are you ready to go, Eamon?
More or less, I've a bit scratchy throat, but on that, I'm good. I got a couple
Okay.
of Ricola here if I need to, and water.
Yep.
Actually, a cup of tea might be a better idea.
Yeah.
Tea is very soothing and
Well, when my husband has had semesters where he gave 3 lectures in a row, he found chocolate milk is being very nice and coating and getting him through that third lecture.
that sounds like a good plan to me.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I could not go much longer than 30 minutes.
All right. Okay. I need to go do something. I'll be right back.
No problem.
Eamon, you want to try sharing your screen and bringing up your PowerPoint just to make sure you're ready for when we start?
Let me try. Uh, okay. I think that's it.
There we go. Okay. The YouTube stream will if you leave your camera on, it will the YouTube stream live stream will capture you up in the upper right corner throughout your whole talk. If you don't want that, just turn off your camera once you start speaking, and then all we'll see is your presentation.
Okay. I think it's probably better to turn off my camera.
Okay.
So,
Okay, so that's working.
okay. So
So
we just get out of
stop
that.
sharing.
Um, let's see. How do I stop sharing? Do I go
Go back to the Zoom window.
back to my Zoom window?
Yeah, minimize it. Minimize that window right where you are.
And then I hit share again.
Um, well,
Stop
if you
it.
minimize,
Stop
this is
share.
your,
Okay.
there you go. Okay.
They've changed all the software, and
Yes, they have.
it's very different than it used to be. And I have trouble with a lot of it. It's worse on my phone than it is on my computer.
Yeah.
I was trying to upload some stuff last Friday for an insurance company. They wanted some photographs and stuff and proof of payment of certain things. And the procedure for uploading it on the iPhone now is totally different. It's counterintuitive. You click on what you want to upload, and then you unclick on it, and then it uploads. But that's totally counterintuitive, at least to me it is.
Yeah.
I just renewed my membership. That site is working exactly the way it always has.
Um, it it doesn't ask for addresses.
Oh,
And I say, we need addresses. How is anybody supposed to sell something physical if they don't have an address to ship it? And they're going, well, we're making it easier for the buyer to check out. So they're looking into that, because as a membership chair, I use that as a check to see when people move, because they're not always as Don, if you are can hear us, why don't you back out, sign off, and then come back in now. So I think your connection got stuck. I hope you can hear me. Oh, there you are. Okay. I got Don. Don had to email me his address correction. Okay. There we go. Now we're getting people on. Eric Clements, if you can hear me, please answer your text. Thank you.
I can hear you, Barbara. Terry Humble.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just wondering, Eric's back in Cape Girardeau and I'm in Boulder, Colorado. So I was just talking to him in case he's probably getting his dinner ready right now.
And I understand it's warmer in Boulder than it is in Missouri.
Yeah, and has been. They have still have snow from 3 weeks ago, and the snow out here melted really quite quickly.
Yeah.
Whoops. Okay, it's 1 minute after. Why don't we give it another 4 minutes and we'll start at 5 after. That's our normal starting time. All the people who normally talk beforehand aren't here today. So it's kind of quiet. Anybody planning to visit any mining sites this summer? Anything you want to share mining wise? Otherwise?
No, I'm about stoked out, I think. Not many mines out here in Nebraska either.
Yeah, I could see that.
Well, actually, last Sunday, I did visit uh, a Wisconsin lead mine that I had previously known nothing about. And it was quite interesting. Turn of the last century, probably, although I think it had been reworked probably 1905, 1906-ish, because there was a big ore car in it on tracks. So very interesting to see. Small, but vigorously worked. So brand new to me.
Oh, okay.
There are still some out there that I have not seen. Quite a few out there I have not seen. This was a new one.
And Barbara, this is Brian. I
Yes.
live in Oracle, Arizona now.
Uh-huh.
And last week I took the Tucson Wash, which is to the east of me, which is a big mining area, Tiger Mine complex, and stopped at the Ford mine in the Tucson Wash. So it'd be just a bit north of the Tiger Mining complex. Found a little bit of wolfenite and a little bit of turquoise.
Ooh, cool.
Yeah, it was kind of fun. I've not found turquoise there before. I have found wolfenite there before. But looking forward to Kansas.
Yeah. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, be interesting.
Chris Huggard has been in contact with me because I'll be doing the registration, and everything seems to be falling in place right now. They just need a couple more vendors to give them their final prices, and we hope to get the registration mid-March, I think, if we can get
Wonderful.
the newsletter out on time.
I've been leaving my wife instructions because I think I'm going to be out of the country when you release all that. And so I
Oh,
said,
okay.
would you please download that form and fill it out for me?
Okay. The hotel information is on the website under the on the conference information page. It's a Hampton Inn for I think $109 a night, so not too bad. Okay, why don't we get started?
Or
Amy?
maybe just one other comment about transportation there. Obviously, it is a little bit of a chore to get to the Joplin Airport, which is the closest one to Pittsburgh. But there's good connections out through O'Hare. I just made reservations the other day, and we have a pretty good connection.
Yeah.
I'm trying to come out a day ahead to do the suggested tour of the Missouri part of the tri-state, which is one of the things you can click on the website.
Okay.
And then,
Also, the Kansas City is only 2.5, 3 hours away too.
right, well, there's the Joplin Airport is okay. It has they fly these bombardier
Yeah.
smaller jets in there, but there's a couple or three of them a day.
Okay.
And
Emmett,
it's on
you've
the
missed.
Pittsburgh side of Joplin, so it's pretty
Oh, okay.
close to Pittsburgh.
Eamon, how are you coming with sharing your screen again? There we go. Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about an era or a period in U.S. history when safety wasn't quite the value in mining that it is today. I mean, today I was seeing some stuff recently there that there are quite a few other industries like construction and roofing and so on that are significantly at this point more dangerous than mining. Mining actually is a relatively safe industry to work in today. But sadly, that wasn't always the case. the 19th and early 20th centuries were actually dangerous times in almost every industry. In the 1870s, there were actually more people being killed every year in railroad accidents than there were in mining accidents. But in relative terms, the safety performance in the United States was way behind that of other advanced economies like the United Kingdom and Germany. And especially in what we call the Gilded Age, which is between the Civil War and World War One, life, unfortunately, was not as valuable as it is today. And to some degree, a lot of that was because many of the personnel being killed, in fact, the majority being killed, were in the North were immigrants, and in the South were African Americans, because at the time they were the people who were doing the mining. But there were many people who cared, and some of their stories are well known, and there are people in the Mining Hall of Fame, Joseph Holmes and some others, who are there for their safety record. But there are many who are not well known, and they actually came from all walks of life, and by a combination of humanitarian, social, labor, political action, exerted a lot of positive influences over the years on both the mine ownership, on legislatures, and on the industry in general. Many did at a great sacrifice to themselves, both financially and otherwise, but they still achieved great things. Government, unfortunately, did not become a significant factor for safety in the mining industry until about 1910, and we will discuss that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to cite maybe, I think, 7 fairly significant mining disasters over the years, and talk about the disasters themselves, and who suffered, and why it happened. And then I'm going to discuss some of the outcomes, some of the things that happened as a result of the agitation of particular members of the safety community and the mining community. So in Avondale in Pennsylvania, it's in northern Pennsylvania in the anthracite mining district, there was a timber fire in a coal shaft that caused a buildup of carbon monoxide, which killed 110 miners. About 90 of them were Welsh immigrants. This particular mine had a history of fires. It had a history of union agitation, but it had only one entrance. And I'll discuss that a little bit later. Many of the Irish miners who worked in the mine were absent that day at a funeral. There were actually, I think, 11 Irish miners who died. But because most of the Irish were absent that day, the owners actually blamed arson by Irish union miners for the accident. But an inquest found that the fire originated in a furnace in the mine, and that the mine had only one egress, basically one way to get out. And as such, it was unsafe. There actually had been a law passed the previous year requiring 2 means of egress in coal mines of a certain depth. And this particular mine prevailed upon the legislature for Luzerne County, where it was located, to give them an exemption and not require them to put in a second entrance. John Siney was an immigrant. He was born in Ireland, but grew up most of his time in England. And he founded, after the Civil War, the Working Men's Benevolent Association in St. Clair, Pennsylvania. And his primary MO was to organize the miners as a community He was very effective at bringing together Welsh and English as well as Irish miners, because an awful lot of the issues around mining in that area, the mine ownership would play off one against the other because there was natural enmity between some of those people. He was a leader in worker insurance. He insisted on his workers being trained, and he wanted to cooperate by and large with mine ownership. He understood that when the prices of coal fell in the aftermath of the Civil War, that demand was an issue. And he felt that reducing work hours and reducing production would bring the surplus down and would help everybody. And he was fairly effective in working with mine ownership and getting that done. And he actually got the law passed before the Avondale disaster that required the second egress in the coal mines. But again, in Avondale, they got away with because of the influence they had on the local Democratic representative. But he used the public outcry after 1869 to have the state of Pennsylvania create a mining inspectorate. Now, the mining inspectorate had no enforcement authority. All they could do was inspect the mines. They collected statistics on accidents. They could advise the mines on improving things from a safety purpose, but that was it. But that was the first state agency created to look after mines in the United States. In Mammoth, Pennsylvania, this is in western Pennsylvania, a methane explosion caused by a defective miner's lamp at the H.C. Frick Coking Coal Company resulted in the death of 109 men and boys. And most were Hungarian, Polish, and Italian immigrants who did not speak English. And one, a gentleman called Abraham Yuda Krebs, was a Jewish person who immigrated from Hungary. Almost all of the deaths were from fumes. They were from poisoning as opposed to from the explosion. To give them justice, both the H.C. Frick Company, the Knights of Labor, who were beginning to organize at the time, and the fledgling United Mine Workers Association all set up funds for the families. But the key person was a gentleman by the name of Thomas Lynch. He was the son of an immigrant miner. And at the time, he was an employee, but later he was general manager of the H.C. Frick Coal Company. And he really thought this was just a terrible thing. And he began this company-wide process of safety as our first priority. He had 25 basic rules made out. And he did something very unique. He translated them into 12 different languages so that at least all of the people who could read among the immigrant miners would be capable of understanding them. And this is still the origin of the safety first expression we use today, and it's also the origin of what was called the Coal Miners Handbook. In general, H.C. Frick had an excellent safety record. They very actively recruited coking coal miners from Northumberland in the United Kingdom during the 1870s and 80s. But that stream of workers dried up very quickly, and almost all the miners from the UK that they would recruit would very quickly go west because things were better and remuneration was better for miners out west. South of Chicago, in a place called Cherry, Illinois, in 1909, there was an explosion caused by a lantern in a coal mine. And because of severe mismanagement of the way the airflow was handled, there were 259 men and boys killed. They actually didn't know an awful lot of the people who died. At least 15 under the age of 14 died in the mine. Most were Italian, Slovene, Greek, and other immigrants who, again, did not speak English. This accident, some of the first uses of oxygen masks in trying to rescue workers. We've had some talks in the past about the use of oxygen masks. And over 200 actually did escape this mining accident. So there were benefits to the new technology. The mine was owned by the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, and its inquiry blamed the workers. And that really caused great outrage among the public in general. We've probably all heard of Mother Jones. She was born Mary Harris. She was married to an iron worker in, I believe, Memphis, Tennessee. And during the Civil War, her children and her husband caught yellow fever, which is a particularly nasty malady caused by a mosquito. And the last days of your life when you catch it are horrible. So she was severely traumatized by this. She was an amazing advocate for worker rights, for better wages, and a recruiter for the United Mine Workers of America. But she especially focused on getting children out of mine work because up until, almost the 1920s, really, there were lots of children working as sorters, as mule drivers, or trapper boys. They would have these gates in the mines to control airflow. And they would have a boy right beside the gate who would open and close the gate at the appropriate time. They were called trapper boys. She led a children's march on Washington in 1907 to pressure Teddy Roosevelt, who was then president, to ban child labor. But Teddy Roosevelt told her that's a state's issue. It has nothing to do with the federal government. But before her death in 1931, most states had voted to ban the practice of child labor. The worst industrial mining accident in U.S. history occurred at Monongah in West Virginia in 1907. Officially, 358 miners died, but David McAteer, who wrote the definitive book on the accident, he was a former Secretary of Labor. He said that the death toll was dramatically undercounted and probably in excess of 500 died. The accident occurred when a rail car that was being pulled up out of the mine up onto an elevated portion, actually over the river, and where it would unload onto a tipple into a railroad car. The cable snapped and the railroad car went back into the mine and caused flames and massive explosions. But when the company actually wrote the safety report from the mine, they actually blamed some miners for setting off a premature explosion. And they said it had nothing to do with the railroad car. The year 1907 was a particularly bad year. It was the worst year for coal mining fatalities in the US. Over 3,000 died. Fatality rate of 4.8 per thousand miners employed. And the comparable rate in the United Kingdom that year was less than 1/3 of that. All of this was starting to cause more and more political storm in Washington. And throughout his presidency, Teddy Roosevelt had needled the Congress to pass legislation to work on improving the safety of US mines. In the 60th Congress, which ended in 1908, a bill was actually introduced and got out of Congress, but when it went to the Senate, it was killed by Senator Teller from Colorado, who basically said it was a states' right issue and it was no business of the federal government. But in the 61st Congress, they finally did pass a bill in 1910, and it set up the Bureau of Mines. The primary mandate was to research, record, and promote safety in U.S. mining, and 63% of its budget was directed towards that. They had no enforcement power, and they were not allowed to inspect any mine unless the mine invited them in. Joseph A. Holmes, who had been prominent in both geological circles and in highlighting some of the safety issues in U.S. mines, was made the first director. In the Keweenaw copper country, the company Calumet and Heckley was the key player. But there were many tragedies like the Osceola mine fire. Larry Langton, who has written some of the key books about the Keweenaw, indicated that an average of one man per week died during the life of the Keweenaw copper mining. And other than community support, deceased miners did not receive any compensation. And this was obviously a huge issue. Legally, in the 19th and early 20th century, if you tried to sue a mining company as a result of a death or an injury, you had to disprove 3 standard legal arguments, which basically said that anybody working in a mine knew that it was risky, that most injuries were the result of the miner's own error, and the rest of the injuries were due to another miner's or a fellow servant rule error. But after many years of failure, in 1910, an attorney and an ex-miner by the name of Patrick O'Brien won a case in Michigan for the death of Matti Arakainen, a Finnish immigrant, for wrongful death against the Quincy Mining Company. And the immediate effect of that, although it was a minor issue in and of itself, was to change most companies' stances. And, workmen's compensation had been introduced in Germany in 1870s and most countries in Europe in the 1890s. But it had been opposed by the corporate interests in the United States. But that changed 100% after O'Brien's verdict in Michigan. In 1917, we've I think had other discussions of this accident as well. The Speculator mine in Butte had an electrical fire over a newly installed wire cover system that went out of control. 168 miners died, most from carbon monoxide poisoning as a result of oxygen depletion in the mine and buildup of carbon monoxide. And although this was the worst year for fatalities in Butte mining history, the reality was that more miners and ex-miners died that year in Butte from respiratory issues than did in accidents. The Butte Miners Union and the Western Federation of Miners had been very aware of this problem for years. Their goal throughout the period was safe and steady work. It was neither. But the Federation itself recognized the issue of silicosis and led many unsuccessful efforts to address the issue. And they founded hospitals for dying miners. And if you remember, we had a reception in the one in Park City 2 years ago. But they also built them in Telluride and Silverton and Sandon in British Columbia, mining towns that didn't otherwise have facilities. The problem of silicosis was not really recognized in the US at all. It was known in Europe and in Africa and South Africa and Australia. But what was recognized was that there were high rates of death from tuberculosis in certain mining districts, like the Tri-State Lead District in Missouri and in the copper mining district in Butte. And like Butte had 13 times higher than the national average death rate from tuberculosis. The picture on top here is the tuberculosis sanitarium that was built in near Anaconda in Montana in 1910. You'll notice that it's low slung and has very big windows, unusual for the time. But literally, they would open up all those windows, and the TB patients slept essentially in the open at night. The link between TB and silicosis was not well understood medically at the time. And indeed, in Montana, the medical authorities in the mining districts did not even acknowledge that silicosis, or what we call miners' consumption today, was a disease in that time period. But the US Bureau of Mines was aware of it, and they did 3 really great studies over the next about 15 years. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Anthony Lanza and a US Bureau of Mines team studied the Tri-State Lead Mining District in 1914 and found very high incidence of silicosis in underground miners. And then what they found almost universally was that most of the worst silicosis cases, they also had TB. And then he and Daniel Harrington, Lanza is on the left there and Harrington's on the right. Harrington actually worked for the Bureau of Mines, went to Butte in 1916, and they tested about 1,100 miners, found that about 42% had silicosis, and found that it was much worse the longer you worked. As in the silicosis was much worse, and the TB was much worse. And then in 1924-26, they studied granite workers in Vermont, around southern Vermont, and quantified the dust levels causing acute silicosis. And what they basically found that silicotics who had gotten TB had a life expectancy of about 6 months. So basically, people would develop the silicosis, and then the TB, they would catch TB, and it would finish them off in less than 6 months. Joplin's study in 1914, they found that the average dust level in drilling was quantified at 329 milligrams per cubic meter, and it was 99% silica. The Mine Safety and Health Administration today has a specification. The limit is 15 milligrams per cubic meter. And for respirable silica, which is the finer fraction that can be respired into your lungs, it's 2 orders of magnitude lower than that. What they showed was that wet drilling, where you put water on the drill right as it drilled, could reduce the dust levels by about a factor of 3. And the Missouri legislature, to give them credit, did pass a law in 1917 mandating wet drilling. Again, Butte had a fatality rate of about 4.68 per thousand miners per year in 1910-13, which was high, but the comparable US rate in 2023 was 0.068. In 1913, Anaconda had an all injury frequency rate. That's something that's commonly used today of 338. The rate for the US, the last year I have for is 1.84 for mining. Lanza found that in the miner sample, the TB death rate was 13 times the national average. 90% were men, and their average age was 35. 77% of those that died were immigrants. 40% were Irish born. And they both Lanza and Harrington said that they believed their estimates to be way low, since many people who would live in Butte and would get really sick from either silicosis or tuberculosis would literally go home to die. Anthony Lanza was New York born to an Italian father and a U.S. mother. He worked with the USBM, did a lot of the early work on silicosis and its association with TB. He was later medical director for the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, and he was in the Army Medical Corps in World War II. And finally, a professor of industrial medicine at NYU until he retired in 1964. He also had a prominent role. There was a process developed in Canada around the Second World War called McIntyre powder, which involved infusing miners with very finely divided alumina oxide. And they saw some benefits in rodents, and they introduced it almost as a mandatory thing in Canada over a number of years. and he was very much involved in stopping that from becoming legal within the US. It was used on a limited basis within the US, but not widely. But of course, the McIntyre powder was a complete disaster, and it's caused thousands of issues of Parkinson's disease and a number of other maladies among miners who were exposed to it. Oops. Dan Harrington, I've talked about him in some of my other talks in the past. He was Colorado born, worked for coal companies, graduated from the School of Mines. He was thrown into the fray in the Butte respiratory health issues, the speculator fire. He did the official examination of that fire for the Bureau of Mines in 1917. He ran afoul of the Anaconda Company, and the Bureau became quite politicized in the period from about 1920 to about 24. It became involved in, among other things, the Teapot Dome scandal and some other things. So he left the Bureau temporarily, but came back. And then for 20 some years after he came back, until he retired in 1948, he wrote literally hundreds of reports, did lots and lots of examinations. This was a time when he had no enforcement power whatsoever. But he was really the number one advocate for dust control and for safety in coal mines, preventing explosions in coal mines. A great advocate of workmen's compensation for occupational illness. The Hawk's Nest was this horrible tragedy in West Virginia in the 1930s, where itinerant African-American miners worked in a opening up a hydropower tunnel. And the particular type of silica that was in the tunnel was particularly virulent. And of 2,500 people employed there, some 760, or about 1/3, died within a year of acute silicosis, and 1,500 eventually died from the disease. Um, it caused a great national scandal. And at the time, we were going through the Depression, and there were lots of unemployed lawyers, there were lots of unemployed miners and construction workers. They got together, they sued their former employers, reclaiming illness as a result of silicosis. Um, the most of the suits failed. They maybe 1 in 100 had any success at all. But the insurance industry took note and began to press legislatures to include silicosis as a compensable workplace disability. And they actually started that in about 1940. And Montana actually uh, gave a welfare payment for silicosis disability in 1941. The safety record, unfortunately, did not get too much better over the next 20 years after the Second World War. Coal continued to have numbers, well over 1,000 into the 1930s. The fatality rates were still over 2 per 1,000 in 1940. Metals were not much better. The U.S. Bureau of Mines, MSHA didn't exist, had no enforcement authority, and didn't get it until the mid 1960s. And things like black lung were not recognized as compensable disabilities until into the 1960s. So this picture here is this is Joseph Holmes, and those would have been some of the early oxygen masks that they would have used. And Holmes, when he formed the Bureau of Mines, he put together, I think, about 4 railroad cars, and he located them, one, I think, in Pennsylvania, and he had one in Colorado, and I'm not sure where the others were. And when an accident occurred in some place, they would bring the railroad car in with a team of experts who could use the oxygen masks and who could do mine investigations. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. And then just need to unshare your screen.
Unshare. Okay.
Yeah.
I have to get.
Yeah, get out of there we go. Very good. Thank you. Questions? Comments from people?
Yeah, I've clicked on the raise my hand thing, but
Okay.
it was a great presentation, Eamon, because it really shows some of the other people that were involved in the movement for improving mining safety, which led ultimately to the Bureau of Mines, particularly after that Monongah uh, uh, disaster. Um, I think what's really interesting is how many of these sites we visited through the years with the Mining History Association. Um, certainly Butte, and we saw actually visited the Avondale mine site when we had the Scranton meeting, and we're going back to Houghton in a couple of years, and it's totally amazing. Um, I was interested in your comments about the safety first idea. I think generally, I always thought that it was Joseph Holmes that kind of coined that phrase, but I wasn't aware of the other guy that you mentioned, and I don't know how you feel about that, but I will say one thing. I worked for the Bureau of Mines for a while, and I think the actual number, the original railroad cars, was 10, and by the time they sort of got to the point where they didn't do the railroad cars anymore, it was substantially more. There's one totally restored railroad car at the museum in Pueblo, Colorado, which we saw when we went to Trinidad. And if you went up to the steel plant in the Pueblo Museum, it's really nicely done. And there was another one in Canada that was just brought up there and I remember seeing it in the 1960s, and it's totally vanished. I don't know what happened to it. But it had the U.S. Bureau of Mines on it, and it was it was before the Big Nickel, or it was about the time the Big Nickel was built at Sudbury.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Okay, Christopher, your question?
Yeah, thank you. It was a great presentation. I was wondering if you had references or sourcing, especially for the that legal arguments, legal situation slide that you shared, that you could send to us. That would just be really interesting for some of my own research that I'm doing.
Okay. Okay, Christopher. It may take me a couple of days, but yes,
Of
I
course.
have I have a number of references on that. Yeah.
Awesome. That would be great. I would love to see it. Thank you.
And JT? There we go. Up, you're muted.
There you go. Okay. Thank you. Hey, Eamon, that was awesome. That was a really great, interesting presentation. I would love to see you bring that forward, if you will. And all I can think of is about that awful, not great, that Sunshine Mine disaster back in the early 70s. But anyway, I was just reminded, I don't have a question for you, but I was just reminded of listening to this and thinking about, every time I joined a new company and we all went through this 40 hours of safety training. And the one that really stood out to me was when I worked at Climax up in Leadville. And, we all get the book, it's all, and some of it is obviously very specific to, the mining techniques of that particular mine. And the instructor got up the first day and said, "Gentlemen, I want you to realize that this book was written in blood." And to me, that was one of the most profound and, really you kind of sit up and pay attention after you hear something like that. So that's all I wanted to say.
That's
Thank you.
that's a good point. Uh, I had a summer job at the Climax mine one year, and
Oh,
I still have the respirator that they issued everybody when you showed up on the property, and yet down in the mine, it was hard to find miners and workers wearing them because they were hot. And this was before self-rescuers and things which came later. But so mine is in pretty mint condition, I have to admit.
I think I came after you, but you remember how cold that mine was. I
Yeah, it
still
was.
get over the fact that I had to wear long johns to go to work.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I had a flannel lined denim jacket that kept you pretty toasty if you're doing stuff there. But yeah, but the guys on all the crews that I worked on there, I wasn't there. I was just there during the summer. I can't remember many of the guys wearing the respirators, but we weren't doing drilling in the development areas. We were running the slusher drifts and the I was making bombs for the hang up man who scampered up the funnel shaped holes to try to get the ore flowing again. Pretty dangerous job.
Any other comments or questions?
One source, if my 30-year-old bibliography will hold up here, Mark Wyman's Hard Rock Epic, I believe, talks about this, and Ron Brown's book on the miners as well. Let's see. Yeah, Rocky Mountain Miners, the Intermountain West. Both of those. And of course, those are both metal mines, not coal mining, but I think Mark Wyman's Hard Rock Epic is pretty much about developing how safety gets developed and how safetyism and unionism are intertwined, the one kind of leading to the other, and you know. At least that's what I can remember from graduate school all those years ago.
Thank you, Eric.
Well, we had a pretty important coal mining district in eastern Virginia, just in the coal fields that were west of Richmond, and these were operated during the Civil War and for a while after. They were notoriously gassy, and they had a huge number of African American miners that were killed in various explosions that occurred there. And there are a couple of books that I've written, excellent books that I've written about what was going on. The the guy for a while that was the superintendent there was a guy named Hendricks, and he was a German guy and a buddy of Rossiter Raymond. And Rossiter Raymond wrote an obituary on this guy that was trying to be as laudatory as he could be, but he really obviously didn't think too much of Hendrix because they had at least one major, really bad explosion there during his watch.
Yeah, Rossiter Raymond actually was very hard on the Western mines when he was the U.S. Commissioner for mining from, let's see, 1869 to 75 or whatever. He would be very critical of the Comstock, which at the time was not a particularly safe place, and of Western mines in general. But and a lot of his own buddies in Pennsylvania in the coal mines, where most of the deaths were occurring, uh, he kind of let them off scot-free.
Okay, Bill, you had a question?
Well, more a comment. If you look back, if you can get a hold of a first edition copy of Peel's Mining Engineer's Handbook and see what they said about silicosis there, they stated that you definitely did not get silicosis from mining high grade sulfide ores. It was you just didn't happen if you were mining the ores that they didn't give you silicosis. And I think that didn't do much for advancing science of preventing silicosis. Statements like that.
You know, and again, in defense of the situation, the medical understanding of silicosis in the U.S. It took a while to develop it. It was understood very well in places like the United Kingdom and in especially in South Africa, where they had a very serious problem. They understood it well, but in the U.S., like I said, there were I've read testimony in court cases in Montana in the 1910, 1912 timeframe where doctors denied that there were such, and I mean reputable doctors denied that there was such a thing as miners consumption. They said there was no such thing.
Mark?
You know, there's a modern parallel or a semi-modern parallel to the silicosis story, and that's in the uranium fields of the mid 20th century when suddenly miners were developing all kinds of respiratory and cancer issues because of radon exposure and the combination of radon exposure and smoking. It killed off a whole generation of uranium miners. And there were also industry and regulatory denials that there was a cause and effect relationship there until it became apparent that there indeed was.
Yes, And the Bureau, that was kind of the next big study that the Bureau did in terms of fundamental science. They investigated that, and then eventually they came and investigated the um, black lung issue. By the way, I don't know if you've all heard, but NIOSH, which basically took over the scientific and medical part of mining, the National Institute for Occupational Health and Safety. Last spring, the whole mining section, which was located, I think, they had about 300 in Pittsburgh and about 200 people in Spokane, Washington. They were all laid off. I mean, it was just eliminated completely. But my understanding is they're trying to hire them back now, and they're putting it back. So the industry complained bitterly about it to the government. So I'm hopeful. I'll find out a little bit more because George Luxbacher, who
Right.
is a student of mining history himself, but he used to be president of SME. He was actually the head of the mining section of NIOSH. And I'll meet him at the SME convention in Salt Lake City the end of this month.
D. Constance?
Yes, I'm a new member, but the county commissioners in the Kewanee Peninsula in the late 1800s had a mining inspector. He had to inspect the mines, and every year he had to give a report to the county commissioners of all the deaths. He had to investigate every death, and there, as was noted in the talk, almost always these were attributed to miners' errors. And when you read the reports, they're quite fascinating. Some of them were pretty boneheaded moves, and they were the miners' cause. But um, those are all of them were miners' fault. But some of them were clearly theirs. But no matter whose fault it was always the miner. But yeah, he had to give an annual report of all the deaths that happened to mines in the county, and it makes fascinating readings when you read their reports that they submitted to the commissioners.
Yeah, all these mining districts, I mean, they would be, when somebody was killed, there would be an autopsy. Which is a legal process, and they would do a proper examination, and almost universally, the the result of the coroner's. I'm sorry, they would do not just an autopsy, but an inquest, an official
Yes.
legal inquest. And almost inevitably, the conclusion of the inquest was that the miner was at fault or his best buddy was at fault.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
Bill?
one other comment. My dad worked for Braden Copper Company for his entire life. He didn't work in the mine very long, but he had information of all the company activities. And at the time that he retired in 1958, he said that at the time, their production costs were unbelievable, 8 cents a pound of copper. So you can see why Kennecott fought tooth and toenail to keep Braden. But of that 8 cents a pound of copper, 1 cent was for silicosis compensation. So it gives you an idea of the amount of liability that you had down there. 12% of your production cost was silicosis compensation.
Okay. Well, while you're thinking of something else, next month I finally got the schedule all made out for the rest of for the next two nuggets. March 10th, it's Digging Too Deep, the role of the abandoned mines in American horror movies. Ooh, Brian Leach, of course. And then April, Footprints of Ancient Mining and Smelting Heritage in Medieval India. Senarthram. Sorry, I can't really go for the last name. I will learn before we get to April. But that's really neat that we're going to go international on this. And then we probably will not have a Nugget in May. There might be a pop-up. It depends on where I am. I'm in Boulder now, trying to sell the family farm, and I may be back in Cape Girardeau by then, but who knows? So any other comments or questions? Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Eamon. That was a wonderful and informative
Real good talk.
talk.
Excellent.
Very good. So thank you very much. And thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, Eamon.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.